Hi, Richard. You're Richard Ream.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I'm Karen Horseman, and we've discussed that I'm a lawyer from the Ministry of Attorney General in British Columbia, Canada. And we're sitting in a law office in Salt Lake City at the moment. And I've explained to you that my colleagues and I are working on a reference in the Canadian courts that will decide the question of the polygamy prohibition in our criminal code and whether it's constitutional. And we've been speaking to people that have had experiences in polygamous communities about their experiences, and you've kindly agreed to talk about yours today. That all sound about right?
Yeah.
So, Rich, why don't we start by having you explain your family history, where you were born and who your parents were?
I was born in Magna, Utah in 1982. My father is Howard Ream, and my mother is Bonnie Ream. However, my other mother is Martina Barlow Ream, my mother Bonnie's sister. I have 30 siblings, for a total of 31 children, counting myself.
And where were you born?
In Magna, Utah, at home. I was delivered by a private midwife who was hired by my mother.
And so of the 30 siblings that you have, Rich, how many are direct siblings, as in children of your mother?
18. I have 18 full-blooded siblings and 12 half-siblings.
And can you explain what your living situation was like in Magna when you were still living there?
There was my father had a home that was 3 bedrooms on the main floor, and in the basement there was one big common area similar to a family room, but it served as a utility area, boiler room. There was a furnace to heat the house, a coal-fired furnace, and the washer-dryer area. In order to accommodate all the people he had living on the property, he brought in 2 campers, a cab over camper, like would go in the bed of a pickup, as well as a travel trailer. And at the time I can remember, my earliest memories are of sleeping on the floor in that family room or laundry room downstairs with 8 or 10 other of my brothers and sisters, and the older boys were out in the campers, and the 3 eldest sisters in the home had one of the bedrooms on the main floor, and then each of the wives had one, and Dad alternated between their bedrooms for his lodging accommodation.
And your parents were members of what is kind of commonly referred to as the FLDS Church, is that right?
Yes, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And the area that you lived in Magna when you were born, was that an FLDS community?
No, absolutely not. It was just a regular part of suburbia America, if you will. We had mostly Mormons living around us. Well, granted, this is Utah. And my older brothers and sisters who were of school age were schooled in public school. And we were the only polygamous family in that area, to my knowledge. And in order to cover the relationship of what was being done there to our neighbors, we passed our half-brothers and sisters off as our cousins, and we weren't allowed to refer to my dad's second wife as Mother Martina. It was Aunt Martina. And the cover story they gave, if I remember correctly, had something to do with her being a widowed relative of ours who had all these children. However, I don't know if any of the neighbors ever caught on to the fact that her family was still continuing to grow when she was still having babies, although she was a widow or whatever the deal was, whatever they told them.
We've heard about the fact that there were actual polygamous communities down in Short Creek. Can you explain why you guys were living up in Magna at that time?
We were living in Magna because from the time my father got out of the service till we moved down to Short Creek in 1985, he was a civilian employee at Hillfield approximately 35 miles north of Salt Lake City, a Hill Air Force Base. He was a radar repair technician up there. And in order to keep his job, he had to live within so many miles of the base. And also, we did have access to church meetings and group gatherings and things of that sort here, because there was a polygamist enclave, or a division of our church, that was based in Sandy, Utah.
And Sandy, is that part of Salt Lake or just adjacent to Salt Lake?
That's a suburb of Salt Lake.
And Rich, do you know how old your mom was when she married your dad?
My mother was 18 when she married Dad.
And was she married to him as part of what we've had referred to as a placement marriage?
Yes, it was a placement marriage, directed by Leroy Johnson, who was the prophet at that time. He was then subsequently married 10 years later to Matina, Bonnie's younger sister. And she was 18 at the time of her marriage as well.
Okay, you've indicated that in 1985, so I guess when you were about 3, the family moved down to Short Creek?
That's correct.
And we've also heard that area referred to as the twin communities of Colorado City and Hilldale.
Hilldale, Utah, yes. And actually, we did land on the Hilldale side, the Utah side of the line first. I almost forgot that. For a matter of months, I believe it was less than a year, but I'm not positive because I was so young at the time. We lived in a trailer house with our accompanying camper trailers and campers just down the hill from my grandfather's place, which would be my mother's dad's property. He actually owned the property we stayed in for the first while there while they were renovating this old laundromat, which later became my father's family home.
And that home was in Colorado City?
It was on the Arizona side, yeah.
Okay. And so for the first year, you kind of camped out in the trailers you described?
Yeah, we were making do with a place to crash until we could get something big enough to hold us all.
And so when you moved on to the converted laundromat on the Colorado City side, is that the house you then grew up in?
By and large, yes. There was another home on the property, or what would have been the property. It was kind of been subdivided and split in half at the time, that we years later was assigned to my father to be the caretaker of by the church. I mean, all that was UEP property anyway. Nobody owed anything, except the UEP owned everything. But they gave him that other house, and adjacent to it was a very large foundation of a home that had been started and never finished. And we built onto that, and that was supposed to be the home that was to house all my father's children. Unfortunately, though, money matters and other things got in the way to the point that by the time we even had one level of that home finished, he didn't have near enough children left living at home to fill it anymore.
So is it the case then that the entire family, both your dad's wives and all the kids, ended up living in the converted laundromat house?
Oh, we did. When his family was large, yes, we were stuck in that. And then we got that other home, which was quite small too, but it was still crowded as all get out. But the big house that we all had dreams and hopes of living in someday never really did come about for us, because by the time it was even finished to where some of it was livable, everybody had grown up, moved out, gotten married, had kids of their own, and there wasn't but a small handful of children left there with the parents.
So can you describe what the living arrangement was once you moved onto the Colorado City side?
When we moved into the laundromat, Dad had quite a large supply of military surplus type bunk beds, and he would stack those 3 high. There was 5 rooms in that house, if I remember correctly, and each of these had 3 bunk beds, 3 high, or as many as you could fit, 3 high in it. But I recall sharing a room with 5 of my brothers. There were 6 of us in it. We had 2 tiers of bunk beds, 3 high. And in comparison to where we had lived, sleeping on the floor in both the trailer house on the Hilldale side and up in Magna, Utah, I was thinking that was pretty luxurious accommodations.
And so by the time you moved into Colorado City, you were 4 years old then?
Approximately. I don't think we were at that trailer for a whole year. It was probably less than a year. But I know it wasn't more than one.
And did you start school kind of at the age we would expect kids to start kindergarten then, around 5 or so?
Yeah, I went to kindergarten at age 6 actually. Did nothing for a year pretty much, and I went into first grade at 8 years old, which was the age that my dad always started his first graders at, and the reason for that I'm still not sure of. Where everybody else goes to school at 6, I didn't go to school till I was 8. However, because of my ability to learn and pick up on things so quickly, I already had a higher education level than my first grade counterparts, and they immediately moved me to second. I wasn't in first grade for 2 whole weeks, and they jumped me one.
And this was in the public school in
Yes.
Colorado City? And how far did you get through in school down in Colorado City?
I finished 6th grade. When I wanted to enroll for 7th, that wasn't permitted. My dad didn't allow me to do that because he was concerned about me having contact with the opposite sex, which is strictly forbidden.
So he wanted you to get out of an environment where there was that temptation?
Where there were girls, yes.
And what did he have you do then instead of going to school?
Work.
What kind of things did you do?
Anything. We would dig post holes, we'd build fences, we'd feed cows, we'd milk cows, we'd drive trucks, we'd work on appliances quite a bit, because that was something Dad did as a service to the community. He was an appliance repairman. In fact, he's a crackerjack of a repairman. He could fix anything. And he did a lot of work at the dairy, and a lot of work at the storehouse, and a lot of work at the big potato cooler that was owned by the church. And we had to assist him with his projects. And if he didn't have something for us to do, by gosh, he knew someone who did.
And so you started doing that when you should have been in grade 7. But if I could just go back to school for a second. You talked about the fact that contact between members of the opposite sex was prohibited. Was that prohibited by the church?
Yeah, very much so.
And
thus prohibited by our parents, our brothers, our sisters, anybody who cared about what the church wanted would take a stand against it, if you will.
And did the church have an influence then in what you were taught at school?
Absolutely. The school was by and large controlled by active members and active supporters of the church, so on that basis, everybody from the janitor to the superintendent to every last member of the school board is beholden to and holds himself accountable to the prophet and the leadership of this church. So they had a pretty good stronghold on what curriculum was passed on to the students and what was withheld. For example, I very distinctly remember all the textbooks for health class had the sections covering issues of STDs and sex education removed, simply because their logic, I guess, behind that is that if you don't know what sex is, period, there's no risk of getting an STD. Solve that problem. Well, they don't want to pollute your innocent mind, so we're not going to explain to you how to protect yourself should you choose to participate in this, because you're not going to be participating in it because you don't know what it is. There you go, problem solved.
And when you said that your dad had been concerned about being in school, nevertheless created the opportunity for you to have contact with the opposite sex, was that just a general concern, or was there someone specifically that he was concerned about you being in touch with?
Honestly, I don't remember. I think it was a concern in general, but there was at that time, there was a young lady that caught my eye a little better than the rest of them did, and I don't know, I always liked girls. I mean, even just to have as friends, I kind of found them to be I don't want to sound like a sexist, but intriguing and neat creatures. And I've always had a sense of humor that females are usually pretty responsive to. I know how to make them laugh, you know. And it wasn't even just so much a sexual thing, or you want to go and take that step with somebody, as I always had friends that were of the opposite sex, and that made my dad very concerned, because they can't shelter you forever from the facts of life, and once you pick up on them on your own, they figure if you're spending time around girls, it's going to happen eventually, and that's the worst possible outcome in the eyes of a parent in the FLDS, next to their child being a murderer, to be a fornicator, or to be morally unclean.
And so in school, were you taught about what would eventually happen in terms of your marriage to someone in the opposite sex and how that was going to work?
Well, not in school. No, not in the public school. They were careful to avoid you got to understand, we were going to school with children who were members of the apostate church over the hill in Centennial Park. And if they got to pushing the religion thing too hard, not only were there children in the school that were members of that church that had split off, there were teachers and staff in that school that were members of the church that had split off, and they kept the religion thing pretty much in check. And in fact, some of us used to get gotten after for discussing religion at school because of the whole separation of church and state thing. So they didn't really push religion on you at school, but they would not discuss and give you an objective education when it came to certain matters, i.e. sex education, because it was frowned upon by the church.
And so what were you taught in church and in your home about marriage?
The way I understood it growing up is that marriage is a sacred bond between a man and a woman. And the way we believed it was marriage only is and only can be designated by God through His mouthpiece, the prophet, that you don't have the right to choose your own companion. That's something God chooses for you, and the day you're worthy of having that connection or that bond with another human being, then God's going to speak from heaven and tell the prophet, Richie Ream's ready to get married, and he needs to get married to thus and so, and you go meet this person, and 20 minutes later you're saying I do in front of the prophet, and in most cases then you holler down to the magistrate in St. George and make it legal, if you so choose to do so. But you are not to speculate on who you might like to get married to. You are not to hope you get married to a certain person. And looking at a girl more than once with thoughts of, damn, I would just love to be with her for the rest of my life, is considered an almost cardinal sin, and also you're then accused of another crime, which they call not sacrificing your feelings, because if you look at this girl and you want her to be your wife, then you're shoving what God wants for you aside in favor of what you want for yourself.
And so it wasn't ever your expectation that you were going to be able to choose who you'd marry, in other words?
Well, I don't know if I should say this on tape, because I don't think I even ever told my own parents this, but I decided a long time ago that someone else wasn't choosing it for me. And that's where that road really ended for me. It was just a matter of time, and I was only about 14 years old at the time. That was it. And marriage is so complicated and so difficult to manage and so hard to hold together, and society's getting worse and worse on these issues, to where it's getting harder than it's ever been. I don't honestly know how somebody can be expected to have or maintain a healthy relationship with a spouse that they didn't even have a say in choosing. I love my Lindy to death. She's my other half, she's my partner, and we have tension sometimes that just almost overwhelming. And I chose her. So I can't understand how somebody who has no say in the matter, no choice in the matter, is expected to make this thing last forever and into time and all eternity, yada, yada, yada.
What about plural marriage? Were you taught about that?
Absolutely. It's not known strictly as plural marriage in that society. It's referred to as the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. That it's a high doctrine that is to be participated in only by the most pure and the most worthy persons. And once it's designated, the way I was taught originally growing up is that once designated, it cannot be reversed. No way. No way in heaven or on earth can that marriage be undone or annulled or reversed in any way, shape, or form. However, that shifted a little bit when Warren Jeffs come into town and started hacking families apart like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre type situation. And used the excuse that it was God's will that these men lose their families, which falls in direct contradiction to the idea that this marriage is 100% forever and 4 days. There's just no way these marriages can end. That was what we were taught. And it had it pounded in our heads to the point where I honestly believed it. I believed that the only marriage that's going to last beyond this lifetime was a marriage done under the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, and the people who were sealed to each other under that covenant cannot be undone. And then, like I say, Warren Jeffs come in and started disbanding families in direct contradiction to what we've been taught for so many years.
So when you were in school, it wasn't Warren Jeffs who was the prophet then, was it Rulon?
Rulon.
Yeah. And so you've been telling us, Rich, about when you would have otherwise been in grade 7, but your dad had taken you out to put you to work.
There's a couple of issues to that, not the least of which is the financial aspect. He could draw a wage for my labors. Whether I worked for someone else and handed him my paycheck every week, which was known to happen, or whether he had me working for somebody who paid him directly, which happened a few times. It was a matter of trying to support the family he had that was, almost too much for any one man. I look up to him. I have immense respect for him because I don't know how in the hell he held it together as well as he did with that many mouths to feed for so many years.
Was it a struggle for your family?
Absolutely. We were constantly on the edge of poverty. And that's why I say, and I know this, firsthand, people who have everything appreciate nothing, and people who have nothing appreciate everything. I appreciate a lot of dumb things that are of no consequence to other people. Why? Because I never had them.
And so, in going to work when you otherwise would have been in school, you were helping the family with that?
Yes, that was one side of that coin. The other side of the coin is the association with girls at the public school. To solve that problem. And also, the way I had it put to me is, well, you don't need to graduate high school and you don't need to go to college because, well, by the time you're old enough to enter college, I'll be surprised if there's even a college for you to go to. Christ is going to return to this earth and destructions are going to come and knock down all the infrastructure and all the institutions, and the world's going to end and our paper money ain't going to be worth a damn thing, so you're better off learning how to grow a row of corn and fatten up a hog and slaughter it than you are trying to go to college, because those are the skills that will really help you survive when this god-awful apocalypse comes down and wipes everything out and you can't go to the store for groceries anymore. That was the justification in refusing your son his education that he wanted.
And were you around kind of 12 or 13 at this period of time?
I would have been. I think I was 13.
And was that the first time that you'd started working for your dad, or had you been working for
Oh, no. I don't remember the first time I ever got handed a shovel or a rake or a hoe. It must have been, it was. It was when we first moved to Colorado City. Matina was the mother who handled all the children. My mother was a career lady. She worked for the school district at that time, and she did for 20-some years thereafter. She actually retired from the school just recently.
And
But
Tina,
Matina was the one who brought the children up, and Mother was working to help support the family. So actually, dead to rights, I was raised by Matina.
and she
by
was
and large.
responsible for all of your
For all the
siblings.
children. And she did a great job. She's a wonderful lady, as is my own mother. But Matina used to have us choose the tools out of the shed there, and we would walk down the dirt road about a half mile where there was this really large community garden that grew carrots and tomatoes and corn and things like that. And everybody in town could go and pick off this garden if they needed vegetables for their family. That's what it was there for. But she'd have us get out there and help the caretakers of that garden weed it and dig furrows for water and stuff like that when we were barely old enough to handle garden tools. So as far as work goes, I guess work's as much a part of me as polygamy or anything else that made me Rich Ream, because as far back as I can remember, I don't remember a day of not doing it.
You were telling me before the camera got turned on about the first time you drove a vehicle.
Yeah, first time I drove a vehicle, I believe I was 9 years old. And there was a lot right after that, more so when I got into my teens, 13 and 14. I was driving commercial trucks, tractor trailers, mostly around town. Sometimes we'd sneak a few miles out if there was a gravel haul or something going on where we had to go to the BLM pit, which is about 20 miles out of town. And eventually I wound up running cross country in a tractor trailer, which is what I still do today. But it was easy enough to get away with operating a vehicle while you weren't even old enough to obtain a learner's permit for it and barely tall enough to reach the pedals, when the law enforcement is so entirely and totally held by the church, and these people are friends of your parents and your parents are friends of them, that unless you were really being a nuisance or causing a problem or endangering somebody, just about anybody who could see over that steering wheel could get away with driving a car across town or around town.
And so this period of time that you worked for your dad after you left school, and so I presume you were putting in longer days than you had been when you were still in school?
Oh, absolutely. 16 hours a day in a lot of cases, and sometimes more than that. But it never mattered to me whether I worked side by side with my father on projects he was doing, or whether I was working for, say, L&M Equipment as a mechanic and a body worker over there in their paint shop, because either way, I never reaped the proceeds of my own work. It went to Dad.
You never got a paycheck for it?
No. I would get a paycheck from L&M, but it was a strict directive of my father's house as well as the church that if you live at home with your father, you do what with your paycheck? You sign it over and you turn it in. You give it to him to go to support the family, because you're part of his family, and any money you make is automatically his, because he's supporting you, he's housing you, he's clothing you.
And would your dad in turn be giving some of that money in the form of tithing to the church?
Absolutely. He would always ask me, did you pay tithing on this? And if I told him no, then he would do it. If I told him yes, he'd keep the whole thing. Now, in defense of that system, if I say I needed a new shirt or a pair of jeans, or if I wanted a new pair of boots, I could tell him, well, I need this, and usually I had to do it right when I handed him my paycheck, or else the money would get spent on something else. But he was really good about handing a little back to me if I needed some.
Your dad
He did not want to deprive any of his boys of having the things they needed if they were willing to work for him. That was his big thing, is that if you're willing to work for it, you should have it.
Now, Rich, again, before we turn the camera on, you've been telling us a story about when you turned 15 and you were asked to leave the community temporarily. We'll get to that in a moment, but can you just explain to us what led up to your move up to Salt Lake when you were 15?
There was Well, in spite of my dad's, yeah, I gotta back it up just a little here, so bear with me. In spite of his efforts to separate me or sever me from the opposite sex by removing me from the public school system, it ultimately didn't pan out for him or have the desired results, because he'd make sure I got work good and hard, so he'd have a pretty good idea where I'd be at night, in bed asleep, because you're so bone tired you can't do anything else. Somehow I still managed to find time to get into a rather fast-moving and fast-paced, intense relationship with the girl that I had met at the public school, but that didn't live far from my house, thus made it very logistically easy to meet up. Her place, my place, didn't matter. Usually at her place. Even would crawl in her window on some occasions in the middle of the night, quiet as a mouse. But when it came to my parents' attention that I was having a relationship with her, and they found out to what extent it had gone, to where we were actually having a conjugal relationship, it really rocked the boat, and it upset the parents to, I mean, worse than I've ever seen them upset before or since, literally. And Dad turned to, I think it was the bishop, I'm not positive, it might have been the prophet himself, I don't remember. But he turned to one of the church elders for guidance on how to handle the situation, and he was told to get me out of his home on a temporary basis, because I was a bad apple that was going to spoil the rest of the box, or rub off on my siblings, if you will. And he decided I needed some pretty intensive indoctrination and religious training, so they sent me to Salt Lake City to live with an uncle's family, where I was, when the school year started for 8th grade. See, I missed 7th. When the school year started for 8th grade, they enrolled me in Warren's little boot camp up there at Alta Academy. I call it Warren's boot camp, because that's where his best indoctrinated, brainwashed people came from, were his star students of Alta Academy. Well, they thought that could probably get me to do a U-turn and get my feet back on the path to righteousness. Yeah, as if such a thing were possible. Anyway, I spent a little over a year in Salt Lake City, living with my uncle and his family. All his children went to Alta Academy, except for a couple of them that were similar to me and got expelled for infractions against the code of behavior. Of that school year, I made it about 2/3 of the way through before I was expelled for, once again, what else? A relationship with a girl. And this one wasn't even to the point that the original one that got me sent there was to. All they had was one note from me to her, and a few phone calls that somebody was able to eavesdrop on. And it blew up, and I was dragged before Warren Jeffs and put on the carpet to answer for my actions. And when I didn't act sorry and penitent enough, he says, well, we don't need you here. Can't have you in the school, get out. So they sent me away. And I stayed in Salt Lake a while longer, working for my uncle. He had a trucking company, and I worked in his shop until I was allowed to move back home. And when I did move back home, I had just turned 16. I remember this very well, because I finally got that laminate, that card everybody begs for when they get that age. I got that driver's license, and it wasn't 2 days after my driver's license came in the mail that my dad approached me. So this would have been in 1998. My dad approached me and said he was going to send me to Canada to work in one of Winston's lumber mills up there. He had just opened his Bonners Ferry operation to give the U.S. boys a place where they could legally be employed and work. Now, he had been having U.S. boys work there off and on, but had come under fire a few times for employing people or using people to do labor in Canada that weren't exactly legal to do so. And I had come back down from Salt Lake and immediately fallen right back into my pattern of bad behavior. I met a new girlfriend and was seeing more of her than I was of anybody else in town or the family, and I was getting worse and worse because I was getting to the point where I didn't care who saw or who knew. So covering it up wasn't even an option anymore, and my dad figured I was totally off the deep end and a loose cannon again, because I would walk down the street with this gal and hold her hand in broad daylight. I didn't care. And this gets better yet. In fact, I forgot to tell you something when the camera was off, but you'll appreciate this. And her and I hadn't gotten to the point where we were having anything close to a sexual relationship. We were just really damn good friends, and I imagine that was probably what we were working our way towards and swinging at, because, well, we really liked each other a lot. But Dad wanted to put a stopper on that before it got out of control, and so he made arrangements to send me up there to work with Winston.
And this is Winston Blackmore.
Yes. I went to Bonners Ferry, and there was a bunkhouse there on the property at Bonners Ferry that the crew lived in, a trailer house, a 70-footer. It was a pretty good-sized trailer house. Well, that was our accommodation. We lived right there at the place we worked at. You'd walk out the door of the trailer, and I don't know, it was maybe 500 yards across the dirt and gravel lot to an old pole barn where we'd sit there and push tree stakes through a peeler all day and band these babies up and get them ready for shipping. We had a feller there who was working with us that was a truck driver that would haul this finished product down to our customer who was buying it from us down there by Coeur d'Alene. At any rate, I went to Canada, and I was told I needed to be rebaptized again. This would be the second time. The second time I'd be rebaptized.
Because you've been rebaptized after Salt Lake City.
Yes, I missed that. I'm sorry. Anyway, Winston rebaptized me, and I was doing fine there. I had actually gotten to the point where I was starting to feel a little bit ashamed for some of my actions, and, well, just because it's what you want to do might not mean it's right, and sometimes you got to set aside what you want to do if you're going to do what's right, and that was the stuff we were being taught. And Winston had he had a way with young guys, boys that age, where no one else in the world might not be able to communicate with you in a way that you could understand. Winston could do it. I don't know if it's just his magnetic personality or what, but to this day I still am just damn proud to call the guy my friend. But he got me seeing that maybe things weren't as quite as uptight and restrictive as I thought, and also I was thinking I might be turning a corner to where I wasn't as doomed as I thought I was, because Winston was notorious for dropping a bug in the ear of the prophet when it came time to arrange marriages as to who was digging on who. So if you were actually in Winston's group or part of what he was doing up there in Canada, you had a pretty good chance, if you let it be known that you had taken a shine to a particular person, when it came time for you to get married, there's a good bet that'd be the person you got assigned to, because Winston appreciated the force of attraction between boys and girls.
And the prophet at this time was still
ruling, yes.
So
now, this was in 98. While I was up there working in Bonners Ferry for Winston is when Rowan had his first stroke. However, I was there. I went up there in April, and come October of the same year of 1998, the very same girl that had got me sent up there for associating with shows up one day, 1,100 miles away, visiting a friend of hers in Lister, BC. I didn't know she was there. I was at work. I was minding my business. Well, until I went to church, and I went to church and I spotted her. I seen her there, and I felt all the resolve that I had built up to being a good man and doing better and turning over a new leaf just really starting to slide. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to get bad. She's right there. You know, when she was 1,000 miles away, it's pretty damn easy to keep your hands and your eyes and your thoughts off of her. Because, and what good does it do you to think about someone you can't touch or associate with or talk to? No problem. And that same day, I spent a little while talking to her there on Winston's front porch. And that was the other thing I liked about being up there, is people would not come and bust you in the chops for talking to the girls. Now, if they suspected there was something illicit going on, you'd get put in your place for that, but not for a conversation. And I thought, oh man, I still feel the same way I did about her then. And I had finally gotten rebaptized. Daddy was proud of me. Winston was proud of me. Everybody except Warren was proud of me, but I don't think he was ever going to be proud of me again after the little stunt I pulled in his boot camp. But I was scared to death of losing the status I had gained in the eyes of these people I respected. So I went to Winston and I explained the situation to him, and I said, she's here and she wants to stay here, and I'm here and I have a terrible weakness towards her. I think it might be best if I go home. He said, what are you saying, you can't keep your pecker to yourself? I believe is exactly what he said. I said, well, yeah, basically. Okay, that's fair enough. If you don't think you can handle it, I guess it's good of you to be honest and stand up about it. So he sent me back home.
To Colorado City.
And I was glad he did, because later that year, my brother George, who was my best friend in the whole world, in December was buried alive in a construction accident. He was a pipe setter for an excavation outfit, and he was killed in that accident, and I was able to rush out there and participate in recovering his body from the hole that had caved in on him, where I wouldn't have been able to if I had still been stuck up there. But I got to be really close to him in the last few months he was alive again. We were close all our lives, but we'd been apart all that time I was in Canada. And if I hadn't come home when I did, I probably would have missed out on getting to spend the rest of the time I did with him. So I was glad for that reason. And that's one thing I still look for in everything that happens to me and everything I go through. I always try to look for the purpose and the reason that's behind it, because from where I stand, I believe there is a God, and I believe that He gives and takes for a reason. And no matter how crummy the situation might seem to you and me right now, you can't disregard His purpose or His hand in it. And I think it's important too to remember that, because there's a little bit of good in every bad. No matter how shitty it seems at the time. However, to get back on subject, the girl I mentioned earlier that mysteriously showed up in Canada while I was there supposed to be repenting, just a matter of a few short months later, I believe it was in April of the following year, got married to a Canadian. And last count, I don't know if this is accurate, at last count she had 3 that I know of, and that's been, 9 years ago. So who knows how many she's got by now. I'm not in contact with her or anyone in her family. There are a couple of her brothers that I know casually. Maybe if I run into one of them, I'll find out. But last I knew, I personally laid eyes on her. She had three little Indians.
So she stayed up in Canada, never
She
came
is
back
still
to
there,
Colorado
and
City.
she's actually part of Jimmy's little offshoot of Warren's church.
Jimmy Oler.
Yeah. So is he going to be watching this or what?
He may.
Oh, hi, Jimmy. Yeah, I know you never did like me, but that's okay. I didn't really like you either. You was all right most of the time, though, and you're a pretty fair guy.
So when you came back to
Well,
Colorado
I've tried so hard not to laugh. I was just wondering.
Yeah, no.
And I'm sorry I left her name out, but she's probably well respected in her circles, and she knows who she is. She'll know if she sees it. But I hope nobody else catches on. For her sake, not for mine. I have absolutely no shame and no conscience.
So at this period of time, Rich, when you came back from Canada, I mean, where was your mind at in terms of the FLDS doctrine? Were you still thinking you were going to stay part of the church, or had you started?
I was actually more into it and more indoctrinated at that time, right around the time my brother died, than I had been in years. I mean, since I was very young, very small. I was back in the saddle. I was going for broke. I was going for gold.
Waiting for the world to end?
Something like that. I guess that's what I was doing. No, I was just started focusing everything on being that picture perfect person that everybody told me I needed to be in order to be worthy of receiving a wife, because I'm a family man. I love my children, and I wanted to have children. And as long as I stayed a part of that society, that was a privilege. That was not going to be extended unless I convinced some influential people that I was worthy and capable of such responsibility. So that's what I was focused on. But it never came about, not for me. And the more I tried to please, and the less pleased they became, even though I was trying, honestly trying, the best I could, giving all I had to give, and that never came about, and they never would throw me a bone or give me a reason to be interested in their church or their society. That's when it started to taper off again.
What started to taper off?
My desire to be a part of the church and have the prophet give me a wife and make babies with said wife for the next 30 years or whatever.
And so did you
whatever I was trying to do, honestly, it's such a blur to me now, I'm pretty sure, but I do remember being focused and consciously seeking to try to get on that list of eligible bachelors who aren't going to be bachelors no more. I wanted to start a family. And that's what I worked toward for better part of 2.5 years. It wasn't right up until the end of my days in the FLDS that I kind of got the embittered feeling, and then the family started getting broken apart, and I did a major crash and burn, a 180 from where I was. And I don't think, even now today, that the choice I ultimately made was a bad one. And I certainly feel like I've reaped a great deal of blessing for walking the path that I've walked and living the life I've lived. And apparently you don't have to have the prophet's seal of approval or his stamp of approval to have a decent marriage and a couple of beautiful children and a healthy family, because I managed to do it without him.
And you were 19, is that right, Rich?
I was 19 and a half. I was almost 20.
And you described to us some of the conflict you'd been having with Warren right before you left. Is that really what triggered the decision to walk away entirely?
No, nothing ever triggers that, and that is a life-changing decision, believe it or not. When you're getting ready to slam the door on everything that's familiar to you, I mean, think about it. That's going to cause some upset up in here. It might make you question your own sanity a little bit down the road, too. But there were a few contributing factors, not the least of which is that I felt like I was in a dead-end life. One, because of my previous sins, shortcomings, weaknesses. I was all but told point blank by Warren Jeffs that I was not eligible and would not be eligible for marriage in the FLDS because I had committed fornication. So there's a dead giveaway right there that you ain't going nowhere. You've pretty much climbed as high as you're going to climb in this society, which wasn't appealing to me. I wanted the wife and the children and all that, what have you. And secondly, he started to tear apart the families that had been placed together by the church. So that kind of turns your appetite for a church marriage off. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So now you're saying because they gave it, they can take it? I might have to rethink what I want out of this here. And third, it was just the fact Warren Jeffs could not tell enough lies to cover the ones he had already told anymore. The man is of extremely high intelligence. I dare say that as far as IQ goes, he's probably smarter than you and me put together. But he made a huge mistake, and it's real common with people who are smart like that. He outsmarted his own common sense. Bad idea. He dug himself in too deep with the lies he was telling that the new ones couldn't cover him anymore. And if a 19-year-old kid can call you out and tell you you're a phony and tell you you're a fucking liar and call you a murderer of families right to your face, that's not good for your society if everything you're doing is contingent upon having total control of the people. Because now you got someone who's not even half your age calling you out. And even coming from a rebellious teenager who's maybe not the most popular or well respected or well received person in town, it can cause seeds of doubt to start growing in the minds of people around them. And it's just like a fire. You start a little fire, and if you've got dry material and a little breeze, it's going to be a big fire pretty quick. So for that reason, from where he stood, I had to go, I'm pretty sure. And for the sake of my own sanity and my desire to strike out on my own and have my own family and make my own babies and go home to my own wife, I had to go. Honestly, Warren Jeffs telling me to remove myself from that society is probably the only good thing the man's ever done for me. The only good thing. And I thank him for it. Because as far as I'm concerned, he's a waste of oxygen and he's a terrible, awful, pathetic sample of a specimen of a human being. But he did do me one good turn. He threw me out of there. And I'm glad he did, because I was at the point where I might have stayed there. Who knows how long? Maybe a month, maybe 6, maybe a year longer, had I not been pushed out that door by him. Because at that time, I had such a terrible inner conflict with what I was trying to hang on to in terms of what I believed and what I didn't, and what I was going to dispose of. And I've tried hard, even now, day by day, when certain subjects come up that I don't think about every day, and I'll get into a debate on some of the issues of the principles I was taught growing up. I always try to be careful not to throw my babies out with my bathwater, because you're basically trying to establish if a polygamous society is abusive. And that's not a question that can be easily answered, but to put it as objectively as I know how, No, it's not. The society itself isn't. There are members of those societies that are very abusive and do abuse and have countless victims. However, on one hand, I do my best not to feel sorry for myself because, one, self-pity doesn't get me anything, and two, I honestly know, I can guarantee just from me to you, that my parents did the very best they know how, and they're damn good people. And they have my undying respect for the insurmountable feat they've pulled off, raising as many children as they did on the limited resources they had, as well as teaching each one of us how to work hard. They teach us how to talk straight to people. There's not a one of us that's a politician or a liar, and there's not a one of us that's afraid to work, and there's not a one of us that expects to have anything for nothing. So there's good that comes out of it too. That's what I'm getting at. I'm happy for the good things that were ingrained into me and became a part of my character. And I'm a little sad for the things that were lost, like the education I wanted. But I was never abused by any member of my family. Not in terms of just being part of the church. Yeah, you get kicked around a little. It's a different way to live. But by and large, I don't think the society's abusive, and if it was going on the level like I explained, where you can be blackballed and isolated and humiliated and taught even to feel like you're not worth a turd on a stick because you make a mistake or because you have involvement with a girl of a sexual nature or something like that. I think that's mildly abusive. But there's not a society anywhere in the world that I know of that's 100% righteous and 100% abuse-free. I've never seen one. Everybody knows what happened with the Catholic Church and their little sex abuse scandal. There's been issues with certain members of the Mormon Church getting messy and doing things they shouldn't do with young children. So I think for purposes of being fair and being objective, I don't think that the society should be labeled as being abusive just because they're polygamous, because it's not the polygamy that's causing the abuse. It's the people in it and the way it's being run. And even, for example, I was happy growing up. I have a great deal of respect for Rule and Jess even to this day, and I have none for his son Warren. And how can that be? They ran things entirely different. There was aspects of Rule and Jeff's character that I admired. And as far as I'm concerned, Warren Jess has no redeeming qualities.
And now, right now, Rich, as we sit here, you've mentioned a few times now that you're married and you've got 2 kids and a third on the way. And I'm going to try and put this question as succinctly as I can, but I'm just wondering how you view your life today and what you have versus where it might have been if you'd stayed within the FLDS in terms of your own level of happiness.
That's not even a question I can answer because it calls for way too much speculation. In order to know what would have happened to me had I stayed in the FLDS, I'd have to have stayed there and found out, or have a crystal ball. Okay, and I don't have either one.
Let's put it a different way. Without getting you to speculate, I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, like, you're no longer a member of the church today, is that right? You're no longer a member of the FLDS.
I'm no longer a member of any organized church.
And so, I guess what I'm getting at is how have you found life on the outside, if I can put it that way? Which is still a big question.
Well, my dad has a quote that fits right in here, so I'm going to throw that in for you. Life is just like a sandwich. The more you put into it, the better it is. You don't get anything you don't give. I found life to be quite just sometimes on the edge of cruel, but just. And life is just because it's what you make it. And each person really is the master of their own destiny. And people who make the mistake of measuring their life value or their success in terms of dollars, I feel sorry for them. I've made and lost a lot of money on different things, and it's never made any difference for me. But going to bed at night and hearing my little boy cry and digging him out of his crib and laying him down next to me on the pillow and falling back to sleep and feeling his cheek blow on my, or feeling his breath breeze across my cheek right here. That's what makes my life good, and that's why I want to live it. And I feel like God's given me more than I'll ever will deserve or ever have deserved. And I thank Him for it, because not a lot of people have been exposed as much as I have to some of the darker aspects and darker days of life. But I don't believe there's a lot of people who have the profound appreciation for it that I feel in my heart either. So, like I say, there you go again. There, I try to flip those coins over and squeeze the good out and throw the bad aside. Because I grew up without a lot of things. My parents weren't really exceptionally affectionate towards me, and how could they be with that many children? How do they dote on one or the other? In fact, they try to almost avoid showing affection altogether just so the jealousy problem doesn't arise. But I like to spoil and dote my children half to death. Now, I don't give them things that are bad for them or anything like that, but anytime I'm at home, if I got my son and my daughter there, I can guarantee you one's on one knee and one's on the other, and it doesn't matter how tired I am, I'll hold them until they fall asleep. Then I'll take them to their beds until one of them wakes up. But in terms of would I rather be here than there, I'd have to say absolutely yes. And the reason for that is that right here's where God wants me to be, or else I wouldn't be here. Because God has a way of getting His way with me, and sometimes he's a damn bully about it. Sometimes all He's got to do is tug on your sleeve a little and you go where you're supposed to go, and other times He kicks you out the door of a jet at 30,000 feet with a parachute when you really didn't want to jump. But by and large, He is God, and I feel like I'm where He wants me to be. And because of that, I feel like He's blessed me, because I've learned to accept and acknowledge His hand in my life. And I'm glad for the upbringing I had, because they taught us to put our families first. I've never seen a man in my life that worked harder to support his family than my dad did. He's my hero. And he's even a better man than me, because there is no way in hell you will ever see me try to hold together a household with more than one wife and that many children, and especially have those wives be sisters. As far as I'm concerned, the guy needs a goddamn medal. Good man.
Do you get to see your parents very much these days, Rich?
Now the times I get to see them are few and far between, but they're pleasant enough. We have decent visits, usually right there in their front yard. They won't let me in their home because they have to rededicate the premises whenever I come in there and then leave. But they've always been decent to me when I have returned, and I'm always glad to see them. I haven't seen them now for right close to a year, right now today. But I'm hoping to get a chance to soon, because they are getting on in years now. Now my father was born in 1933. He's 77 years old.
Rich, just before I let you go altogether today, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit on the video about the litigation that you were involved in, the Lost Boys litigation.
The Lost Boys case was originally filed by myself and 6 other plaintiffs. It was directly related to Warren Jeffs and his practice of expelling young boys from the community and kicking their asses out onto the street to go get tough or die or starve or do something, but don't stay here. And my involvement in that case wasn't necessarily so much over being expelled as that they had a way of going about their expulsion that, in my case specifically, I was owed a pretty hefty sum of money for some work I'd performed for a man who was part of the church, and when I was expelled, that man was told by Warren not to pay me. He says, well, don't pay him, he's an apostate, and we don't need to give our money to people who are going to use it to fight us. So, in spite of the fact that I had done the work and done an excellent job, this man basically told me, well, screw you, I'm not paying you because I don't have to, you're an apostate. Well, that pissed me off, because not only do they cast you out of the home you do have, and you are supposed to go get tough and die, they try to hold you back from collecting the resources that might have made it easier for you, or giving you some assistance or that leg up to get your own start in the world. And it wasn't just one person they did that to. They poisoned a lot of people against paying up for work that I had done. That's how I personally became involved with it. But there are instances of boys who, as young as the youngest one I personally know of was John Jessup, and at age 13, this boy showed up on my doorstep. I had a rental home down there in Hurricane after I had left Colorado City. And this boy's brothers came and dropped him off on my doorstep with a bag of clothes and said he can't stay in my mom's house anymore. Warren says he can't stay there. And he says, well, he's 13 years old. You can't throw out your 13-year-old brother. We don't have a choice. If we don't do it, then Warren will throw us out too. They just left him. He's a young kid. However, Dan Fisher caught wind of some of the stuff that was going on, and he gathered up these other plaintiffs, and how we wound up with the name Lost Boys is beyond me, is because I'm very good with directions. I drive a truck, for Christ's sake. I can find addresses better than anybody you'll ever meet. Right? I don't get lost. And on top of that, excuse me people, I'm 25 fucking years old. Where does a boy turn into a man? Somewhere between 18 and 21, by and large. Anyway, case in point, I don't like the name Lost Boys. However, that's a moniker we wound up with due to different media channels and I don't know what all. But the case was filed as a class action against the FLDS Church and the UEP Trust. And the original charge that we brought against them was alienation of affection, because due to religious influence, these parents were turning their backs on their own children, etc., or poisoning my previous employers against me. We filed the case. Warren Jeffs got this amazing revelation from God or his crystal ball or Jamal the janitor or wherever the hell he gets them from, that he wasn't supposed to reply to our case. His directive to the people was to answer them nothing. So the case goes into default. And as soon as we had a default, we were in a position to loot that trust. I mean, we could have went in there and started selling off property and attaching levies and shit to stuff until we had our monetary amount, which I don't remember the dollar amount of, because it was never much discussed by us, because the case wasn't about monetary gain in the first place. What we were trying to do was shine a light on what was going on. That was the idea. I mean, the case was really just a sideshow for the main attraction, was the way we were seeing it. But anyhow, we find ourselves in this unique position of being winners of this lawsuit by default. And Roger called a meeting of all the plaintiffs, and we sat down and says, well, what do we do now? Just go in there and start moving people out of houses and selling it and taking laugh all the way to the bank, or what? And him and I had discussed it at length in absence of the other clients, and I told him, I says, no, I don't think anybody should seize a damn thing on default, because we have an opportunity to do something incredible. And that is lay aside our personal gain and use this as a way to get our foot in the door to shut down Warren Jeffs and his thugs and secure these properties so people quit getting kicked out of their homes or having their homes threatened if they don't give up their wife or what have you. So Roger and Greg did an awesome job working diligently together. I mean, just night and day toward that end. And I actually even got to come in here and push quite a bit of paper with them. And it's the most boring job I've ever had in my life, so kudos to you people who can stand being lawyers or paralegals or anything attached to it. But I actually got to work with them, and that was a good experience in spite of how bad it bored me. But they did a really good job pulling the resources of the Utah AG's office and the Arizona AG's office to say, look, these boys are poised and ready to loot this trust if that's what you want them to do, but we would rather have this matter called in for review and for hearing, because now we're saying, look, this trust is not being administered. This trust is not being looked after. This trust is in trouble. It has no guardians.
That's the UEP trust.
Exactly. That's how Bruce Winston got appointed to that position, because we used the fact that they had not responded to our lawsuits as a way to prove that nobody cared about it anymore. And the second there was nobody there to care about it anymore, then they quickly appointed a substitute trustee, which was Mr. Winston. And they had effectively taken control of the trust away from Warren Jeffs and his cohorts down there. However, now, as we stand today, that's been appealed. Warren Jeffs' conviction on the rape as an accomplice charge in Utah has been appealed, and I'm pretty sure these lawyers will have this stuff buried in such a shitstorm of paperwork that nobody's going to know where it's going for the next 3.5 years, or that's about my rough estimation anyway. But I don't know how it's all going to shake out, but the ultimate goal of that lawsuit wasn't for me to line my pockets or anyone else to line theirs. It was to try to make a change that could better the lives of thousands of people. And I hope that what we did does ultimately wind up being beneficial to the people we wanted to help, because as it stands, none of us gained anything from it. We wound up with 3 acres apiece, I think, of property that's probably worth around $20,000 a share.
Down in Colorado City.
Yeah, that was what we took as an actual, in terms of hard copy settlement, where we could have taken everything. But we were content with just that little piece, and the only reason why I suggested that or wanted that is because that is our heritage. That is stuff that we work to contribute to, and it's undeveloped property. We didn't want property that had homes that were going to displace a family on it. We wanted the undeveloped property for that very reason. And that's just, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if it's a sentimental value thing, or if it's all the hours of sweat and tears I put into building roads down there and putting pipes in the ground and stringing power lines. But that place is a part of me, and I guess I wanted a part of it. And we each got just a little piece out of that's all that came to us in way of personal gain, was some dirt, which they have plenty of. And I don't know, I imagine if their appeal goes through, or they might appeal and contest our settlement too and get that back. Who knows? But I don't care if they do. Because even if at the end of the day they manage to get all this stuff through court and everything that Roger and Greg worked so hard for and we all tried to accomplish just for nothing, I still feel better about the situation because at least we went to battle even if we got our ass kicked, you know. And I can live with getting my ass kicked, but I can't live with being a coward and not going to battle. That's not acceptable. But that's where our case stands right now. It's pretty much being appealed, and I don't honestly have any way to know which way it's going to go or how it's going to shake out.
Okay, well, I think you'll be relieved to know I've run out of questions, Rich.
Awesome.
I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure the court will as well.